I'm Rachel Davis, and I've been working on a 100 Days Mosaic project, creating mosaics inspired by nature. In this video, I'm going to be talking a little bit about some of the methods and techniques that I've been using to create this project. All the mosaics were made using a similar method in that all the pieces are all set directly into a bed of tile adhesive. And that really helps me create all the different surfaces and the textures. It's the way that I usually work and I feel most comfortable working. So overall, most of the mosaics were made that way. But I also wanted to experiment with a couple of different sort of methods and techniques as I was doing the project. One of the things I experimented a little bit with was using the self-leveling adhesive, which is one way of kind of creating a background for a mosaic. So you kind of create the mosaic and then you create a little mold and you pour some cement into the background and it kind of creates a smooth surface. So I did that on a couple of different pieces just to kind of see what that was like. I think I did it in a total of 3 pieces. One of them worked out really nicely. I used kind of a double pour, so I kind of did the sea and then the sky in 2 different colours, and that worked out really nicely. There was another one I did that was kind of a lichen piece with a background, and I really didn't like the way that the cement pour worked on that. In fact, I took a piece of sandpaper to it and kind of really roughed it up and tried to maybe put some extra colour on it because it just felt too smooth and shiny. So it was quite interesting from that point of view just to kind of experiment with the different effects that you could get with that. And I also played about sort of with other kind of backgrounds, just using the tile adhesive itself as a background and leaving some things plain. Later on, particularly right at the end, I started making these kind of lichen blobs that had some space in the background. And I started sprinkling some of the dust that was left over from preparing the materials. So when you cut up stone and things, there's always like little bits of dust from that. So I'd kept that, and on the background, I just sprinkled a little bit of that just to kind of add a little bit more interest to the background. And I quite liked that effect. And in terms of kind of just thinking about kind of the process and how I went about creating them, I sort of had an inspiration image and just played about with the materials. I usually kind of did a rough dry lay, which is just basically taking the materials and playing about with them on the board just to see how they worked together, to see how they all sort of fitted before I then started actually sticking things down. So that was quite a useful kind of technique to just have a little play with them before, trying not to get too bogged down with kind of how they all look, but just to kind of give that general impression of how things are. In 2023, I went on a course in Northern Ireland, and at that course I learned more about how to work with hot glass and to shape it, as well as learning things about using like self-leveling cement as a background and playing about with some of the textures and things that you could create with that and the different effects. And so in doing this project, I kind of started to experiment a little bit with some of the things that I'd learned on that course. The first thing that I was doing was making the filati, which is basically heating up bits of glass, and when they kind of form a little blob, kind of pulling them into a long strand. That strand is then cut up into lots of little pieces which are placed on edge in the mosaic. So you get these little blobs, little circular, organic kind of shaped pieces to put into the mosaic, and they work really nicely for sort of things like lichen and things that have got little dots in them. So I started a lot of the early mosaics, I was using the filati, and then I kind of pulled out some of the pieces that I'd made when I was on the course that were these kind of lichen cup kind of shapes. And then I thought I'm actually going to start exploring that a little bit more, because a lot of the images that I'd got were sort of lichen, and there were lots of sort of circles and little cup shapes and different things. And it's kind of hard to create those shapes when a lot of my materials have lots of straight edges. And so by using the hot glass and shaping things, I could kind of add a little bit more curve and organic shapes to the mosaics. So I started playing about with creating these kind of lichen-y kind of cup shapes for a couple of pieces. There's another piece as well that I kind of flattened the pieces, sort of squished the glass to make these kind of long, round, flat pieces that I could use on their edges as well. Earlier in the project, I'd got an image that I wanted to work with of some turkey tail fungus. It had lots and lots of these, little bits of fungus sticking out. And the only thing I had at that point that I could think of to use was little pebbles. So they were little slate pebbles, and they worked really nicely. But then later on, once I kind of started playing with the glass, I'm like, actually, I can make these round pieces in the glass as well. And so it created a similar but different kind of piece where the lichen bits were in glass rather than in the slate. So yeah, it was interesting kind of how something that I'd done earlier could then be done in a different way kind of later on, by just sort of experimenting with some of these different techniques a little bit more.